Today, I'd like to talk about the parable of the Chinese farmer. But first, let's listen to it told by Alan Watts.
Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Why, that's great, isn't it?" And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And he said, "Maybe." The whole process of nature is an integrated process of immense complexity, and it is really impossible to tell whether anything that happens in it is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequences of a misfortune, or you never know what will be the consequences of good fortune.
Watts's version of the parable has become the most popular telling of it on the internet. However, the original parable was from a tale in Huainan-zi, an ancient Chinese text that blends Taoist, Confucianist, Buddhist, and legalist concepts. Although the two tales are not identical, with the largest difference being the answer of maybe versus why should I hastily conclude that this is not unfortunate, this difference is likely not much more than the differing translations or Watts offering a more succinct answer for entertainment, as I think we can all agree that maybe is the better sounding of the two and doesn't detract from the meaning of the parable. Similar tales have been told outside of the East. Christians point to the similarities that the tale has to Romans 8:28, and Muslims cite 2:216 in the Quran. The core idea of the parable has become popular in sayings such as, "Every cloud has a silver lining," "Every rose has its thorn," "It's darkest before the dawn," and "A blessing in disguise." But what does a parable really mean? Despite the parallels the parable of the Chinese farmer has to the ideas from other cultures, the tale can be best understood from a Taoist lens. Before finding the meaning in Taoist philosophy, we can find more information on the parable from our two sources. Watts included the parable in his book Eastern Wisdom, Modern Life, with further explanation, stating, "The farmer steadfastly refrained from thinking of things in terms of gain or loss, advantage or disadvantage, because one never knows. In fact, we never really know whether an event is fortune or misfortune. We only know our ever-changing reactions to ever-changing events." Further insight on the tale is included in its introduction and conclusion, where the Huainan-zi states, "It can be difficult to foresee the twists and turns which compel misfortune to beget fortune, and vice versa. And, following the parable, therefore misfortune begets fortune, and fortune begets misfortune. This goes on without end, and its depths cannot be measured." In Taoist metaphysics, distinctions between good and bad, along with other dichotomous moral judgments, are perceptual, not real. Therefore, there are no good or bad events. The events simply are. Good and bad are nothing more than names we apply to events. Without delving too deep into it, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy explains the Taoist theory of names, stating, "The most familiar statement of a widely shared implicit theory of names in ancient China is expressed beautifully in the Tao Te Ching. Call it the contrast theory of names. It treats all words as coming with a complement, converse or opposite. To learn and understand a word is to know what it is and what it is not picked out by. In the Tao Te Ching, the theory lends itself to a linguistic idealist interpretation. Names literally create things. This line of interpretation informs a chaos interpretation of Taoist metaphysics, in which reality is an undifferentiated stuff which humans divide into things by the use of Ming, or names. By understanding that good and bad are nothing more than names or labels, the farmer is able to detach from the inevitable joy or sorrow that would follow each event. But what about the criticisms? Most criticisms claim that these names are more than labels, that they exist beyond our thoughts, and that they are objective realities. Something is good. Something must be bad. I believe the argument can be put as such. If the good results outweigh the bad results, then it was a good event, and vice versa. But the issue comes when we realize that performing this equation accurately is nearly impossible because we cannot know all the consequences of events. Just like when making a decision, it is impossible to take into account all information when making a judgment of whether something is good or bad. As Watts states,
did I take enough data into consideration? And if you think it through, you find you never could take enough data into consideration. The data for a decision in any given situation is infinite.
The parable is the greatest example of this. Bad results from what we believe to be good, and good results from what we believe to be bad. The wisest thing to do would be to act as the farmer did, and withstand judgment, to live without the tugs of fortune and misfortune. Thank you so much for watching the video. Let me know your opinion, anything I missed, or what I could have done better down in the comments down below. And until next time.